What we really saw with our trust in cryptocurrency data is last year, pretty much across markets, there was a cratering of trust in cryptocurrency.
Crypto lost a bit of popularity after people lost faith in it in 2022. But how much are we talking? Is crypto destined for swirlies and purple nurples from now on, or is it still in the cool kids club? Thanks for watching, and don't forget to give that like button a purple nurple of its own.
Morning Consult released data today revealing that trust in crypto across 17 major markets plunged last year by 30% on average, as the industry had been plagued by a series of high-profile bankruptcies and scandals. And yet, the research firm found that despite the drop in trust, digital asset ownership stayed strong. Crypto World's Jordan Smith spoke with the company's managing director of geopolitical risk analysis about the findings and where we go from here.
All right, so Morning Consult came out with this new data on trust in cryptocurrency post FTX collapse this morning. Can you tell us about your findings on trust and what your methodology was in trying to find some of this data?
We survey monthly in 17 countries around the world, and this is not just on cryptocurrency. We survey on a wide range of sort of business climate, ESG, economic sentiment, all types of things. But one of the questions that we have is, do you trust cryptocurrency? And we sort of give people a 4 to 5 point scale where they can say, you know, I trust it a lot, I trust it some, I trust it a little bit, or I don't trust it at all. Or we also give them the option to say, don't know, don't care, basically. And so the good thing about tracking that over time is you know, sometimes you have it be flat for a long time, and then you have interesting events like bankruptcies or things that hit the news, and then you see it move in really interesting ways. And so what we really saw with our trust in cryptocurrency data is last year, pretty much across markets, there was a cratering of trust in cryptocurrency. And I think this won't be a big surprise to people who've been following the industry. We really saw it start to slide after some of the big bankruptcies in like May. And then sort of in the late summer and fall, actually pre-FTX, we saw a huge drop off. And then of course, post FTX, we saw a further drop off. So we're talking about net trust. So we do sort of the people who trust minus those who don't. And we went from somewhere around -8 to -38. So about 30 percentage points decline over the course of 2022. And that's just to give you a sense sort of relative to other data. That's really enormous.
Was the reason for the drop in trust shared by the litany of scandals from the previous year? Or can the blame be focused to one event in particular?
Yeah, that's what I was going to follow up on. I mean, when you're looking across 2022, because you track it monthly, are there particular events that seem to hurt trust the most? Is it those bankruptcies like we saw in May, June, and July, or with FTX in November? Or was there something specific that happened that you could point to in the data and say, this is what was really hurting trust among investors?
You know, it's interesting. We saw the biggest drop off in sort of fall, so September, October, which is kind of in between the main events, right? You had Terra Luna in May and then FTX in November. But what I think was happening is it's sort of the aggregate of all of these events, because, you know, if you were a crypto owner in 2022, it was one thing after another. And then, of course, you're also tracking the price, especially if you're more of a speculative investor. And we saw that in sort of late summer, really dropping and staying below price points that for some people are symbolic, like $20,000 per Bitcoin. And so I think, you know, investors were just gradually becoming more and more convinced that just more bearish, just more convinced that perhaps prices weren't going to rebound, that there were going to be more events like these collapses in the future.
And despite that bearishness, I think one data point that was interesting to me is that you say self-reported crypto retail investors are resilient, is the word that you use. What's driving that resilience, and how does that confidence in crypto differ from country to country?
I'm glad that you pointed that out, because the main thrust of the piece that I wrote was, despite this cratering trust, we don't see cratering ownership. So what's really fascinating about that is, you know, some places you did see declines. The US, you saw about a 5 percentage point decline. But in other countries, you actually saw completely stable, or even in some cases, increased use of cryptocurrency. And I think from our vantage point in a very developed economy with arguably the world's deepest financial system, it's really easy to say, cryptocurrency maybe doesn't have a use case beyond, speculation. But I think if you're looking at some of the places that we saw increased usage or really resilient usage, Nigeria, Turkey, Russia, these are places where they might have a different use case that is not immediately obvious to us. So for example, Russia, sanctions evasion, to be really blunt. In some of these other places, savings preservation. I also saw some research saying, inflation in the US has gone so far up, and yet we haven't seen, this link between high inflation and crypto. But it's really different to have 10% inflation and to have 60% inflation. So I think there might be some threshold at which people look at a volatile asset like Bitcoin and say, that's still looking pretty good compared to the Argentine peso. Maybe it is worth going into that asset a bit.
One question still remains. Although we can possibly predict how the U.S. will handle crypto regulation, how are other countries planning to tame the beast?
I think that's the perfect segue into regulation. So let's end by talking about that. I think the study also mentions how hard regulations could hit the industry in 2023, even if not particularly quickly. But what areas around the globe are you watching most for crypto rulemaking, and what rules do you expect the industry to get hit with the hardest?
My sort of prediction was, we've seen a lot of rulemaking, relatively speaking, but it's been in isolated pockets. So, whether it's the European Union looking at MiCA or different countries scoping CBDCs as sort of an alternative, even blanket bans in countries like Egypt and China. But what I sort of predicted was, because this collapse in trust is really across the board, and yet you have really high adoption across just, a lot of the developing world and pretty stable adoption, even in most wealthy countries, I think you're going to see more coordination. And so I think you're going to see more international rulemaking sort of finally coming to a consensus. And some sort of anecdotal evidence that lends credence to this is the departing head of the FSB specifically said, I think we're going to make some rules on crypto. I think there's, appetite. That's the Financial Stability Board, to make some rules in 2023. Now, I think I wrote in the piece, international rulemaking happens at a stately pace. That is certainly true. I don't think that this would hit tomorrow. If there's an agreement in 2023, I think 2024 is a reasonable timeline for sort of local implementation. But I do think, similar to meme stocks in the US, if you have really high grassroots adoption and you have consumers left holding the bag, that is a recipe, at least in democracies, for more pressure on the government to do something. And I think because this is such an international issue and has hit across the board, I think that we're going to see some more movement on that.
Let us know if your trust is lost or if you'll still let crypto sit with you at lunch. Thanks for watching.